Good morning. Thank you for being here today. This hearing is, of course, running out of time. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the federal government's delay in implementing Network, a government-wide program for procurement of telecommunications service for federal agencies at substantial cost savings. The theory behind networks is a good one. The federal government ought to be able to use the enormous bargaining power to obtain telecom services at a very substantial cost savings. That was the reason the General Services Administration negotiated the network contracts on behalf of federal agencies. By all accounts, GSA negotiated a pretty good deal. But the best deal in the world won't do us any good if the federal agencies don't implement it by transferring their telecom systems to network contracts. This is not a small matter. GSA reports that for every month the transition is delayed, the government is losing approximately $22.4 million in unrealized savings. By that estimate, when factoring in previous losses, we may lose between $300 million and to $500 million in unrealized cost savings by next year. More importantly, when I say we, in this case, we're talking about the taxpayers. This is simply unacceptable. This is not the first time we have looked at this issue. The committee held two hearings, one in 2004, largely focused on planning and strategy aspects of the program, and another hearing in 2005 to address GSA revised strategy for networks. In 2005, we were concerned about the sluggish rollout of network. 5 years later, concern is an understatement. If there is a red flag that has yet to be thrown, I want you to know that I'm throwing it today. The transition to network hasn't really gone on forever. It just feels like it. We are now in the ridiculous position of being 3 years into a 10-year contract that we haven't even implemented. What good are the cost savings if we don't take advantage of them? Just doesn't make sense. Today I want to get a better understanding of just what is delaying the transition to network and what will be done about it. I also want to look closely at the issue of small business, women and minority subcontracting. The network program sets very specific goals for small business and minority participation. The 5 major networks contractors, AT&T, Level 3, Qwest, Sprint, and Verizon, were required to submit small business and minority contracting plans. After reviewing the plans, I'm concerned that the quality of the subcontracting plans vary significantly, and I want to make sure GSA has the information necessary to hold the contractors accountable for their subcontracting plans. All of these parties should know that I take this issue very seriously, and I want to make sure that contractors maximize their efforts to meet their goals. I want to know that specifically it's being done to improve small business and minority participation in the program. Testifying today are the 2 key federal stakeholders involved in the network transition, and of course GSA, which is responsible for overseeing the network program, and Interagency Management Council, which is involved in implementation. We also have the 5 network contractors. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from the Office of Management and Budget. OMB's absence is unfortunate because I think OMB's leadership will be a key factor in expediting the transition to network. I am genuinely disappointed that they chose not to participate today. Nonetheless, I look forward to a thorough examination of the network's transition, and I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today, and I look forward to hearing their testimony. Now I yield 5 minutes to the ranking member of the committee, gentleman from California, Congressman Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding yet another hearing on the loss of savings of federal tax dollars as a result of the slow rollout of networks. Mr. Chairman, like you, in 2007, I thought we were putting this behind us. Agencies faced with a choice of saving money or having better technology available to them, or both, undoubtedly would quickly implement these changes. But that has not been true. It's very clear that in addition to losing $18 million in savings each month in federal agencies, that in fact the older technology versus newer technology opportunities are being squandered. So, Chairman, as you said earlier, we have most but not all of the key players here today. The President of the United States is the Chief Executive Officer of this large corporation. We are ultimately the stockholders, representatives on the board, and the Office of Management and Budget effectively is a chief operating officer, or some might say a combination chief financial and chief operating officer for the government. It is essential that there be someone responsible for networks' failure to be implemented. So I regret that we do not have all the stakeholders here today for that purpose. Mr. Chairman, the taxpayers expect government to be different than the private sector, but they don't expect government to ignore the taxpayers' dollars as though they're not accountable to anyone. Not implementing new technology, not taking cost savings even after they're negotiated using the leverage of our large purchasing power is unconscionable. Although I expect to have some reasons for the delay explained to me today, they clearly will not be acceptable to this committee, and they will not be acceptable to any watchdog for the federal taxpayers. This should be the last time we have to have a hearing showing us that given a choice of doing nothing or doing something that will save the taxpayers money, agencies are continuing to do nothing. It is also very clear that the last administration deserves both credit for the negotiation of a good contract and blame for the period of 2000 to their departure in 2009 for not having more done. So I would like to join with the chairman to explain that this is not a failure of the Obama administration. I don't even think it's a failure of the Bush administration, but it is yet another example where bureaucrats, unseen and seldom known by name, do not care about the taxpayers' money enough to save it. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that all members of the committee have 5 legislative days in which to place their opening statements in the record and revise and extend.
Thank you very much for your statement. Of course, let me indicate that we have to stop at 11 o'clock sharp. And of course, because we have a joint session, and we have to shut down, and we would not want to hold you until after the joint session and then come back. So we hope to try to finish, before, so that everybody can sort of move on with the day.
Mr. Chairman, I would suspect that if we ask leadership, if either of the witnesses would like to attend the joint session, we could arrange for that during their testimony today. If they'd indicate that they could remain, we would see if we couldn't get tickets based on their schedule.
But it'd have to return 15 minutes after the session is over.
No. I'm only saying that for the 2 hours we're going to take them, Mr. Chairman, we perhaps could allow them to be there for the joint session. No intent to ask them to remain beyond that.
Thank you. Let me just ask you, first of all, we swear all of our witnesses in, of course, so we'd like to ask you to stand and to raise your right hand. Do you agree to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? If so, answer in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that the witnesses indicated that they answered in the affirmative. We will now turn to our first witness, of course, Mr. Stephen Kemp, who is acting Commissioner of GSA, Federal Acquisition Services. And our next witness is, of course, is Mr. Bagawalia. Is that correct? Thank you very much. In the Agency Management Council, and of course it is the committee policy, of course, and let the record reflect, of course, that they all answer the affirmative. I ask each witness now to summarize his testimony in 5 minutes And the yellow light, as you know, means that you should wind up within a minute. And, of course, the red light means stop. So the yellow light gives you an idea that the red is getting ready to come. And, of course, which will allow us an opportunity to ask questions. And, you know, red means stop everywhere in the United States. Thank you very much. Mr. Kemp, you may start.
Good morning, Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee. My name is Stephen Kemp. I'm the Acting Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service within the General Services Administration. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide the status of the ongoing transition of the federal government from the FTS 2001 contracts to the Networks Program's suite of network services contracts. Networks is the third in a series of successful GSA contracts and the largest telecommunications program in federal history. These contracts are an outstanding example of strategic sourcing concepts. Networks leverages the federal government's buying power to obtain the best value telecommunications services for all government agencies. It is comprised of two acquisitions, Networks Universal and Networks Enterprise. Networks significantly exceeds its two predecessor contracts in technical breadth, pricing sophistication, operational management, best business practices, and breadth of contractors. It offers 5 contractors for agencies to choose from on 2 separate acquisitions. Transitioning from FTS 2001 to Networks is a complex and resource-intensive process, and agencies face numerous challenges as reflected by the pace of transition. GSA measures the pace of transition by looking at services disconnected from FTS 2001. By May of 2008, 1 year into the transition, the government had transitioned less than 1% of FTS 2001 services. 1 year later, we saw 16% of the transition complete. And as of today, 53% of FTS 2001 services have been disconnected. GSA believes there are a number of reasons why the transition is progressing more slowly than expected. First, as I have mentioned, the networks contracts are complex. They contain a broad range of services and priced items which require technical knowledge of network services. This complexity has made it difficult for agencies to understand the contract and to rapidly move forward with the transition. Secondly, agencies have issued many more statements of work for agency-specific requirements than was envisioned by GSA or the network's contractors. This has created an enormous amount of additional work for the agencies, GSA and the network's contractors, and has resulted in significant increase in the time for agencies to make fair opportunity decisions. Additionally, in some cases, sufficient inventory information was not available for the agencies to make fair opportunity decisions or to order services. Obtaining detailed inventory data is a labor and time-intensive challenge that delayed some agencies in moving forward with the transition. Further, some agencies would benefit from additional managers with expert technical skills and background in network services. At other agencies, the transition would benefit from added technical depth and contracting resources. This reflects the government-wide shortage of acquisition professionals, of which this committee is well aware. Contracting officers assigned to support the network's transition require familiarity with network services terminology, network services terms and conditions, and the roles and responsibilities under the contract. These contracting officers were also subject to protest provisions that were added by Section 843 of the Defense Authorization Act in 2008. These provisions and the protests that ensued also added time to the network's competitive process. Lastly, another area of challenge has been the contractor ordering systems. Some agencies have experienced difficulties entering orders into the contractor's online ordering systems. As a result, some agencies have had to rely on contractors to transcribe the ordering data into their systems, which can introduce yet another source of error and delay. In response to these challenges, GSA developed and implemented a wide range of measures to help agencies accelerate their transition from FTS 2001 to networks. The full extent of this assistance is included in my written testimony. I would like to highlight the fact that during the past year, GSA has offered to provide any assistance to any agency which requires in completing the transition activities. In addition, GSA is providing direct assistance to all small agencies in an effort to virtually conduct the transition for the agency. We continue to be dedicated to doing anything possible to help agencies complete this effort. Current indications of progress and reports to GSA demonstrate that agencies are now highly engaged and are doing everything possible to meet transition schedule deadlines. Through the help of this committee, OMB, and the involvement of senior agency executives, transition is well underway and will be completed. The government will benefit enormously from lower prices and the ability to procure better technical services. Based on GSA's assessment of the progress of transition to date, GSA believes that most agencies will complete the transition by June of 2011. Some large data networks that are still awaiting fair opportunity decisions may not be fully transitioned for 2 years or more. GSA will continue to do everything possible to maintain the current transition momentum and to assist agencies in transitioning as much service as quickly as possible to networks contracts in an effort to realize maximum value from the networks program. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the networks program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. Mr. Bagiwalia.
Good morning, Chairman Mr. Towns, Ranking Member Mr. Issa, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the networks transition. My name is Sanjeev Bhagwalia, and I'm also known as Sunny. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of the Interior. I play two roles regarding the networks program. First, as the DOI CIO, I'm responsible for leading the DOI's transition to networks. Second, as of September 2009, I am the chair of the Interagency Management Council Executive Steering Committee, and I serve in an advisory capacity to the GSA in the development, coordination, and oversight of the telecommunications programs of the government, including networks. It is important to note that I am not the chair of the IMC. The GSA Assistant Commissioner for Integrated Technology Services, Federal Acquisition Service, is the chair of the IMC as noted in the charter. If the chair is not present at the IMC meeting, I support the meeting as the senior ranking Executive Steering Committee chair. I've chosen to highlight three reasons why there are some continued delays in networks in my capacity as the Executive Steering Committee chair. Networks is the largest telecommunications program in the history of the federal government. It is more varied and flexible than the FTS 2001 contract with more than 7,000 requirements and 28 million line items, an increase of almost sixfold over FTS 2001. Second, given the scope of the program and the many competing priorities that agencies are faced with, it is likely that many agencies were and simply are overwhelmed by the task at hand, which had slowed initial progress. But thanks to the recent efforts of the IMC, the Executive Steering Committee, the GSA, OMB, and agency CIOs, federal agencies are now highly engaged in the transition progress, and progress is accelerating. We have achieved a 53% mark in the last 7 months. Ironically, this acceleration is now impacting the ability of vendors to respond to that large volume of agency procurements. I've reviewed the GSA process and believe the GSA's overall procurement process and steps were clear and well laid out in the common process areas, although the tailoring part was too accommodating, adding complexity. In my analysis, I agree with GSA's assessment that there are three problem areas experienced by agencies to conduct their transition: insufficient inventory data, complexity of the network's offerings, and challenges in the fair opportunity process. As the Executive Steering Committee Chair, I've taken 5 steps to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the program. I placed networks on the agenda of the Federal CIO Council, and it has remained as a standing monthly agenda item on the CIO's Council agenda with visibility and metrics. I focused considerable attention on ensuring that agencies' issues and voices regarding the network's transition were brought to the attention of the IMC, the GSA management, and the Federal CIO. I believe in the maxim, what gets measured gets done. I championed the concept of more detailed transparency and metrics, and now most of these metrics are available on the GSA internet site. I've helped establish the Networks Day to provide senior government executives, networks transition managers, and key industry network service providers with an overview of the network's contract and an urgency to completing this transition. I've partnered with GSA and OMB in a relentless follow-up with each agency currently below the benchmark on a regular basis to verify progress, assist with issue resolutions, and bring senior executive commitment to the CIO level to verify that resource allocation exists to get the job done. I would like to highlight 3 steps vendors and other stakeholders can take to expedite the transition to networks. The single most important step is adopt a like-for-like transition approach. That focuses the transition on existing services to the networks contract. Second, agencies should have a solid handle on verifying their inventory of the FTS 2001 services, because an up-to-date inventory is critical to allow for like-to-like transition approach. And agencies should have dedicated resources, including a full-time contracting officer, to get the job done. The vendors also need to adhere to the allocated time for proposal development. When vendors ask for extensions, this introduces delays into the aggressive transition schedules. In some cases, this is due to inadequate statement of work specificity from the government. In other cases, it's also lack of preparation or inadequate specificity from the vendor responses. The federal government should capitalize on 3 things that have worked well. The biggest reason that the pace of the transition is accelerating is the new commitment of the senior leadership at GSA, OMB, and the agencies on the use of metrics and a trust but verify framework to verify that indeed we are making progress. This has been proven in the last 7 months with an achievement of almost 37% improvement in the metrics. An important tool that also supports transition inventory activities is the Networks Inventory Application tool developed by GSA. This tool is excellent. This tool allows GSA and agencies to audit the inventory records throughout the duration of the contract, and agencies should use this tool to ensure the network's inventory is complete and accurate. Finally, the efforts of the IMC Transition Working Group has been invaluable. They help provide a wide variety of support to the overall programs and agencies, defining requirements, helping transition guides, and creating guidelines for bureau transitions. In conclusion, I'm committed to supporting this initiative and will continue to collaborate with GSA, all agencies involved in the transition across government. I welcome your support and attention to the program, and I believe it is providing the needed focus and attention to all agencies to start expediting and energizing their commitment to getting the job done. As I've described before, it is the best interest of the government to continue our momentum and finish the task at hand. We've just passed the 53% mark thanks to our recent focus. Now all the stakeholders need to remain committed and focused, which will save money for the taxpayers, as indicated by GSA and yourself, and utilize the other features and benefits of the 50 other services available on this program. This concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Let me again, thank you for your testimony, both of you. Commissioner Kemp, is this program voluntary or mandatory?
This program is voluntary, but I think almost every agency is participating in it. I think for most of the services, it really is the contract of choice, and every agency is participating in it.
The reason I ask, I'm wondering if that was a reason as to why it was moving so slowly. If it's...
I think most of the agencies have worked with GSA for years on their telecommunications. I think there was one agency early on that wasn't going to be part of it but has come into the fold. All of the agencies are buying their services through this contract, or will be buying a good deal of their services through this contract.
Let me ask you, if agencies are not 100% transitioned by the final deadline, of course, June, I think it's 2011, what will really happen? In other words, are we going to allow government phones to go dead, or will GSA be forced into expensive sole source contracts? What will happen?
Well, first we will look at what is left to transition. We're at the expectation that there will be little left to transition, or there will be a known amount of work left to transition that we're watching move through the pipeline. At that point, or actually we'll probably have to start the negotiations quite a bit before June 2011. We'll have to anticipate what will be still left over at 2011, and then do a sole source contract, a bridge contract, to allow the rest of that work to transition, because we can't afford to have the lines drop dead in June of 2011.
Mr. Bagawalia, I'm tempted to call you Sonny.
Sonny's fine, sir.
Given that the program has had extensive schedule delays, and there have been millions of dollars in unrealized cost savings. Why has the program not been flagged by OMB for an official comprehensive review?
Well, sir, I got involved in September 2009, and OMB, the new federal CIO, got involved immediately right after when we informed them as to what was going on. And they have been involved ever since with basically monthly reviews at the Federal CIO Council. We've also had a follow-up with all the agencies that are below the benchmark with regular follow-up through GSA and OMB. And OMB also has been participating in the IMC Executive Steering Committee and the IMC itself to follow up and see what metrics are indicating who's behind and why is it behind and so on and so forth. So all I can talk about is, since my involvement working with in partnership with GSA and OMB and the other agencies, OMB is focused and helping and has been a great help to us coming forth.
Yeah. Can you explain why the transition seems not to be a priority for the agencies?
Well, sir, this is a very interesting question. So I have a day job. I'm a CIO at the department, and I was just watching basically a struggle going on in terms of potentially a train wreck, as you've mentioned, in terms of savings. But I think all of us want to do the right thing here, and we have been working very hard to kind of make sure that we can fix this and make sure we're going to get there. So the agencies have some challenges. It is they have sometimes it's not on their priority list. They've got many competing priorities, in my view, that I've looked at, and I think somewhere that prioritization requires senior executive commitment and leadership. And I believe your committee's focus also has helped in making sure that people are taking this very seriously, and they have. Secondly, I believe that there's been a lot of challenges within the agencies themselves in terms of a lot of turnover and attrition going on in some of the procurements and other things which are not normally in the CIO's office. And with that, there have been some challenges in terms of what has gone forward. And third, this is a very complex program. This, as I've mentioned before, it's 6 times larger and more complex than FTS 2001, and it's the largest telecommunications program in our history. I just find that in some instances, because of the aforementioned reasons, that the lack of commitment or leadership and oversight, and in some areas that perhaps we've slipped behind. But I'm happy to report that since November 2009, we've gone from 16% to 53%, which is more than the last 2.5 years before that. So I believe we're on the right track, thanks to the oversight provided here and our involvement ourselves of our own volition that is improving this process.
Let me raise this with both of you. What is the key thing that we can do right now, today, tomorrow, to speed this transition? What can we do? I want to get both of you, Commissioner Kemp, and also.
I would say that the only thing that I think, GSA is doing everything it can identify that is useful to moving forward. I think your continued attention to the matter. We've been up talking to both this committee staff and continue to speak with them, provide information on progress, status, and continued attention to the matter will keep senior agency officials focused on the goal.
I would just add that we need to focus on, first, the matter at hand. There are 50 services available on networks, and we should certainly look at that, but we should first focus on a like-for-like transition. That's number one, and I think we should do that because you focus on one thing and get the job done. Second is we need to make sure that we have the chief acquisition officers involved more, because on the most of the side that we've got the Federal CIO Council, the chief information officers have as one of their 12 core competencies acquisition, but the real acquisition warrant and the responsibility lies with the chief acquisition officers. So perhaps they could also help, and we have reached out to them through GSA and OMB. And working with them, I think the focus and triangulate the matter from not only the CIO perspective, but also the CAO perspective would certainly help. And thirdly, as Steve has mentioned, your continued oversight of this, along with what the OMB is doing, is really helping us. And our regular follow-up is really producing results, because people are looking at this and saying, let's get it done. We're making progress. Now we've hit the 53% mark. We can probably get this done, so let's go ahead and do it. And I think that is the kind of momentum and leadership that we need.
Thank you. I now yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kemp, I would hope that I don't ever imply that I'm disappointed in GSA. I give some credence to the fact that you're a service organization. You a little bit like the buffet at the restaurant. If you put all the right things out and people do not bother to take their vegetables, it's not your fault when their diet is imbalanced. But at the same time, do you have regrets that this contract was not envisioned initially to be one in which you spoon-fed the agencies, provided the dollars in a complete service, so that what you're indicated in your opening statement you're now doing in some cases wouldn't have been done at the front end several years ago, where you could have provided the implementation service? That's the first half, and I think I know the answer to that. And the second half is the whole idea that you're having challenges when people are going through the process of essentially awarding a contract that you've already awarded. That's a little different than when I used to order pens in the Army from GSA. I didn't have to worry about anything except buying the service because it had been pre-done. It appears as though the contract complexity is partially based on the fact that you haven't pre-cleared the absolute right of an agency to buy from this buffet that you're offering them without a series of protests and delays. Can you answer those two for me, please?
Sure. Let me start with the first part about what we might have done differently at the beginning. I think we did a good job of trying to identify lessons learned from the last transition, and I think GAO did a report. I think it was in about 2008, looking at all of the processes we had put in place to support the agencies moving forward into the transition. The network services team within GSA did an enormous amount of...
Mr. Kemp, because the time is limited and other members are now coming in and out, I just wanted to be fairly short. If you don't think that you needed to do it, that's fine. If you do think you needed to do it, it's more just almost a yes or no on the first question, please.
I think we've done everything we could and accelerated our support and services, including direct support, as we saw agencies struggling more and more.
Okay, and then the more difficult one, the next time we go around, do we need to create an environment in which basically agencies can make decisions without essentially having one contractor slow roll the process of moving if they don't win?
Well, I think we tried to do that with the pricer that we had developed, which would provide a much more transitioned and smoother process to moving forward. The other thing that we did that I think will help next time is in this contract is the seeds of the corpus of what the agencies will be buying next time. So essentially they will be able to develop their requirements, or they will have a list of what they already have to transition. And I think that was a problem, is identifying just what you needed to transition. They didn't have their inventory well at hand when they started. Okay,
and before I go to Mr. Bagua, or Sonny, as we're choosing to call you, the administration has a lot of things they could do, and certainly OMB absence here speaks very loudly. But this committee also has an ability. Currently, these contracts are being bridged at the higher cost. I'm assuming that these administration agencies would not like this committee, always in need of money to offset some of our other programs, to simply say you shall only negotiate at the lower amount per the contract, even if it's a bridge, and take that money. Something that we could do that would give us some portion of $18 million a month for offsets that the chairman and I need for our programs. So knowing that we could do it, knowing that it would be irresistible, and knowing that you would then, your agencies would then lose those revenues, does that help the agencies, if they're clear that we could, would, and should do that, to move quickly toward getting these bridge loans at the lower amount and taking those monies and using them for other uses within the agencies? Is that a helpful tool? And Sonny, of course, has already responded in the nonverbal manner, but if you would, please.
Well, I think that would give the agencies a lot of impetus to move forward, but it would also create a lot of havoc in some of the agencies, as they would have to determine what things to turn off. whether that be their internet service, their telecommunications
Well, no.
service.
If they're simply unable to convert over today, but they're bridging, and that contract is currently at the higher cost, even though the company they're bridging with has a contract with us at a lower cost for the same services, that to me, if somebody says there's a better price, and I'll give it to you if you give me an annual contract, and we say, yeah, but it'll take a while to do it. If they don't give me that better price today that they're giving the guy down the road during that bridging period, then I'm going to make my decision faster, much faster. So I'm assuming that agencies who said, I can only, and we can make it statutory, I can only write bridge contracts at the lower rate that you've already agreed with GSA to, that if they're held to do it either by saying that Congress will act or that Congress has acted, that they would get those lower prices. And Sonny, I guess I'll go to you since you actually are where the rubber meets the road on this.
I think it would help. There are certain, obviously, some extenuating circumstances, as Steve has mentioned, but I think it would help. I think sometimes you have to push a little bit to make sure everyone understands that we're serious. And I would like to note that OMB did issue a memorandum M08-26 stating that all agencies are required to transition from FTS 2001 to networks, and that new services must transition to network unless a business case justifies otherwise. So I think there was something that was provided, and there's obviously a lot of tailoring and flexibility that's also available in the contract, and I think GSA has done a great job trying to have a standard approach but also a tailoring approach. But if there are too many options, it adds complexity, and complexity equals cost. So in my view, that a little bit of commitment, follow through, and making sure that there is some push would certainly help.
And Chairman, if I could ask just two questions
Sure.
for the record. First of all, if you would respond for the record as to the savings that those contracts, those bridge contracts in place would achieve if they had been at the rate negotiated by GSA for the services that they would receive if they were to make a final determination. We'd like to know just how much the Chairman and I could bank on for other uses if the agencies can't move. And then second of all, Sonny, because it's off topic a little bit, I would appreciate your comments back on the Department of Interior's ability to determine at the Mineral Management Service the correct revenues we're supposed to receive from our offshore oil and other resources. In previous hearings, this committee has been told that we only know that we get the check, we get the wire transfer, and then we have to wait for the actual oil company to tell us how much it's for and what site. I'd appreciate an update on that from your perspective of whether that agency deep down in Department of Interior has improved.
Well,
for
sir,
the record.
I will check the status for you on the second item that you've mentioned. Obviously, I'm not in that particular department, but in that section of the department, but I will get that information for you.
We'll hold the record open for it.
Yes, sir. And on the first part, I think the question was in terms of helping out and going forward, I think it would certainly be helpful in terms of what you're saying and providing a little bit more focus in the area that you've suggested here.
And I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, a very active member of this committee, Congressman Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would ask that my opening statement be entered into the record, if there is no objection.
Objections.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to welcome Don Herring from AT&T, who will appear in our next panel. I had the opportunity to visit AT&T in Oakton in my district about a month or so ago, and very much appreciate the work he and his colleagues at that facility are doing, often on behalf of the United States government. Mr. Bagawalia, and am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, sir.
We've had substantial delays in the transition to networks. And in some cases, the delays have been, from my point of view, extraordinary, where the talent, the capability inside the telecommunications talent is very limited. In one case, there was one federal agency where we had two people, and they died. And when they died, the capability died with them. It brought everything to a standstill at a large federal agency. help me understand how we can be so hollowed out in terms of capability on something as important as telecommunications, and especially when we knew that we needed to implement networks.
Well, sir, I can only talk about the fact when, after I took on the new role as the Executive Steering Committee Chair as of September 2009, but I can also give you from my experiences as a
Can I
department
ask you to
CIO.
pull your microphone closer to you? Thank you.
Yes, sir. So I can only talk about my experiences since September 2009 when I took on this role as the Executive Steering Committee Chair for the IMC. And my observations are that there has been some attrition and turnover in some of the procurement core that exists in a lot of agencies, and along with that goes some talent and some movement and continuity issues that happen on the contract. I'll also say to you that obviously there's some incredible talent in the agencies, but it's uneven in some areas. So clearly, in some departments, perhaps they're behind, but in some other areas, they're fantastic. I can safely say that in my department, the core, the acquisition core, but more importantly, also the technical core folks are very, very qualified. And similarly, I found that GSA has been the same thing. But taken in totality, I find that, from my experiences, that in the government, there's a lot of responsibility that's gone over to the acquisition core. And when there's attrition or movement or turnover or they leave for other jobs, a lot of institutional knowledge goes and tacit knowledge goes with them. And that is perhaps some of the issues that you were talking about. And that does exist. And unfortunately, that is something that we're trying to improve with the new human resources processes and training that it will improve that process.
Well, yeah, I just got to tell you, I've worked for some large companies in the private sector. I don't ever remember, and there's transition in the private sector. People go and take other jobs, people get promoted, people move to other departments. But the hollowing out of an entire capability, especially one as sensitive as telecom, I never saw it in the private sector.
If I could add, sir, that I myself was in the industry for 14 and a half years in the Boeing company. I chose to come to government for service, and I can safely tell you that there are many, many folks who are coming from industry to serve, and we're getting a new infusion of talent as well. But there's also a good balance in terms of the training that exists within our own core. My biggest concern is attrition and the institutional knowledge that people have, and that continuity remains, as you said, a big concern.
Commissioner, well, let me just say on that, I think that this isn't only about making networks work, finally, but frankly, it raises a broader question about the technical skill set and competence we have within federal agencies, and I think we have to address that, because there are lots of other things that this committee has looked at, like cybersecurity. And as you look at what I call the demographic imperative, the baby boom generation that's working its way through the federal workforce, they're going to be retiring. And along with those retirements goes huge skill sets. So this is the canary in the mine shaft, it seems to me, and we ought to use this to not just look at this specific task, but frankly the whole question of, do we have the resident expertise we need moving forward in the federal government, and if not, how do we build it in so that we're not so vulnerable to transitioning by individuals or God forbid, somebody passing on, and with them goes the capability. That's just not acceptable in serving the American public. Commissioner Kemp, GSA's had, speaking of capability, has had to resort to helping agencies write their statement of work. How is it that federal agencies don't have the professionals capable of writing their own statements of work for networks?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the things that we've seen is, I think you hit on it very early here, was that each of the agencies has their own struggles with personnel, and in some agencies, particularly the small agencies, there just aren't enough people with the expertise to do the requirements. And in that instance, we have stepped in for particularly those smaller agencies and actually done the work for them with respect to the requirements, and even supported them very aggressively with their contracting. I think this committee is well aware of the contracting issues across the entire federal government, and the depletion of that contracting core and the competing demands for their time and service to get things done.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I see my time is up, but if I may just observe, again, I think this is a broader issue than just being able to write statements of work, although that's troubling enough. But it raises the question of whether we have the technical expertise within these federal agencies to manage large, complex contracts, systems integration contracts, telecommunications contracts, cybersecurity, Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out. And I just think we've got to get to that, because otherwise we're going to find our ability to even manage the contracts we outsource will be degraded over time. Thank you.
Thank you, gentleman from Virginia, for his comment. Now you 5 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little under the weather this morning, so I'm going to pass on mine, and I'll yield back my
The gentleman
time.
would yield for a second.
Yeah, I'll yield my time to the ranking member. Thank you.
Thank you. And just briefly, Sonny, because you came from the private sector, and a gentleman from Virginia had sort of alluded to that, isn't the greatest, in your opinion, I'm hoping it is, isn't the greatest problem that there is as far as people retiring and things not being able to be done going forward, the tendency to have legacy software and hardware, that the faster the pace of modernization, the less often you end up with somebody being critical because they're part of legacy?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Moore's Law is 18 months. Technology changes full scale, and sometimes it takes us that long to go through the acquisition process. So it's already obsolete by the time you're already going through technology change. So I think the balance between faster acquisition and more smaller, agile processes is the answer.
Okay, so I guess for both sides of the aisle here, the most important thing for us to do is to give you the impetus to move faster, so that less often will you have somebody who's mission critical but on life support. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. Let me just sort of...
Would my colleague, Mr. Chairman, would my colleague...
He controls the time.
I wanted to ask the distinguished ranking member a question, if I could do that.
Missouri controls the time.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you. One of the, Mr. Ice's point is very well taken, but one of the practices that's going on right now is, in the desire to catch up, federal agencies are rating small and medium-sized companies as well as large companies for their expertise. And that is having a devastating impact on small and medium-sized federal contractors. We don't solve this problem of addressing the hollowed-out capability we've got by hollowing out theirs. And that can have a real impact on their ability, frankly, to compete for federal business and provide the expertise they have that we need. So while in solving the problem, I think we have to move forward in being very sensitive to how we're dealing with the private sector. Thank you for yielding.
Thank you. Gentleman, yield back.
Yes, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just sort of... Commissioner Kemp, has GSA calculated the total amount of unrealized cost savings to the American taxpayers? Did you look at it?
I don't believe we've done that yet, but I believe Congressman Issa has given us a QFR to at least give you part of that response back.
Right. Mr. Baglawala, I know you work with the federal chief information officers on the transition. How can we leverage the participation from the chief financial officers community and chief acquisition officers? How can we leverage that?
Well, sir, I think in the OMB, there's a tremendous partnership that has happened between the federal CIO, the federal CFO, the federal CAO, Mr. Gordon, and the federal CFO, Mr. Werfel, and federal CIO, Mr. Kundra, and the federal CTO to work together on these common problems. I think from that standpoint, we need to bring it to their attention, and we have. We're also following up with the CAO, even though that is not within my domain, but we're making that suggestion, and we have provided that suggestion to your staff as well, that if the three parties were to get together from that side, and then likewise we have a concomitant sort of a process at the CIO Council, the CFO Council, and the CAO Council, and a regular exchange of metrics on a regular basis. So one set of metrics that can be viewed by all three. And then also the CFO Council and the CAO Council, just like the Federal CIO Council is following up with every agency, if they could do likewise with the other part of the CFO and CAOs that exist within the departments and agencies, we can solve this issue by triangulating and making sure there's enough oversight and participation. Because basically everyone now knows that they got to get this done, and I think that is what's driving the momentum, and thanks to the oversight as well. I believe that's the only way we'll get this job done, and I have recommended that the CAO and CFOs should be involved in this process.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member, you have any other additional questions? Well, Let me first thank both of you for your testimony, and of course, we look forward to continuing to work with you to try and move this process forward. And of course, if any members have any additional questions, you can submit them. So thank you very, very much, Mr. Balawala, and of course, better known as Sonny, and Mr. Kemp, Commissioner Kemp. Thank you so much for your testimony this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We now move to our second panel. Susan Zelenak, Group President of Verizon Federal. Mr. Don Herring, Senior Vice President at AT&T Government Solutions. And Diana Gowan is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Quest Government Services. And Edward C. Morch, Bill White, Vice President of Federal Programs at the Sprint Nextel Corporation. As with the first panel, the committee's policy that all witnesses are sworn in. So if you would please stand and raise your right hand as I administer the oath. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, answer in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Let me begin with you, Mrs. Zelniak.
Right. I was just saying that with a last name like Zeleniak, I'm not used to being first, so thank you.
Well, with a last name like Towns, I can really relate to that.
All right. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the chance to speak with you today about the status of the network's transition. My name is Susan Zeleniak, and I'm the Group President of Verizon Federal. The benefits and cost savings of networks can still be achieved. Verizon will continue to work closely with our customers to make the promise of networks a reality. First, a word about Verizon. In addition to being an industry-leading wireless provider and our FiOS services, Verizon serves 98% of the Fortune 500 and virtually every federal agency. We have the largest global network of any U.S. carrier, serving 2,700 cities and 159 countries around the world, and we are a recognized leader in cybersecurity. Let me begin by recognizing GSA for their vision in conceiving the networks program. Networks will bring the government the best technologies at the lowest prices. Many cutting-edge solutions like cloud computing and virtualization can be delivered today through the networks contract. GSA got it right. Several factors have contributed to the prolonged transition, as agencies have taken more time than expected to determine their requirements, evaluate their fair opportunity proposals, and make their awards. The situation is understandable given the complexities of many of the agency IT programs. We'd prefer to be further along in the transition process, but recognize that some agencies are taking additional time to make certain that their transition is done right. So far, the biggest lesson that we've learned is that the most successful agencies have dedicated a level of resources required to a smooth and timely transition. Take, for example, the Department of Homeland Security. DHS has one of the largest and most complex networks and yet it is almost done with transition. Why? Because early in the process, DHS committed the resources to getting the job done. Allow me to describe 3 steps Verizon has taken to speed up transition. We invested millions of dollars in a back-office transition program that automates the transition of our existing customers to networks so that they may more quickly realize the savings. We established a network users forum to meet with our customers to discuss any issues that are impacting their transition. And earlier this year, we hosted our own seminar focused on moving agencies from transition to transformation. A standing room only crowd at that event told me that agencies are as anxious as we are to move beyond transition. Clearly, the transition process is proven to be far more complex than anticipated. Thankfully, both GSA and the IMC have taken steps to extend the transition, or expedite the transition. GSA's transition credits and funding for contractors have helped move the process forward. I urge agencies to take advantage of this assistance. In addition, the IMC should continue to provide leadership in identifying and solving transition problems. I'm confident that the promise of networks will become a reality. When it does, the benefits will extend well beyond federal agency users. It will have a meaningful impact on how American citizens interact with their government, and it will help drive solutions to social problems that are important to all of us. In March, the FCC issued its National Broadband Plan. That plan showed how agencies can use broadband services to both improve their performance and generate social benefits. Networks will enable a smarter use of broadband and improve the delivery of government services. Your constituents will enjoy a faster resolution to matters they have with federal agencies. Let me just give you 2 examples of this. As your constituents conduct business with federal agencies online, it will create one more reason for American citizens to adopt broadband. Greater broadband adoption is terribly important for education, job training, and health care, just to name a few. Also, each online solution means one less car on the road. That means less traffic congestion, reduced energy consumption, and less pollution. In conclusion, despite transition delays, networks will provide federal agencies with advanced technologies at the lowest prices. It is important for all agencies to allocate greater resources to the effort and to take advantage of incentives that GSA and the IMC are offering to help with transition. Once the transition is complete, networks will improve government efficiency and performance, deliver cost savings to taxpayers, enable new online services for our citizens, and help drive broadband solutions for social problems. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. White.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee. My name is Bill White, Vice President of Federal Programs for Sprint Nextel Corporation. Sprint appears before the committee today in a unique position as being the only provider to have served FTS 2000, FTS 2001, and the network's contracts for the past 20 years. Sprint has worked very well with GSA over these years to provide billions of dollars in highly reliable telecommunications services and solutions to federal agencies. Sprint has many lessons learned from the last large federal telecom transition, FTS 2000 to 2001, that we bring to the current challenge. I'm here today to present Sprint's views on the ways to expedite the transition in order to save the government time and money and bring about greater competition in the acquisition of telecommunications services. On March 4, 2009, Government Contracting Memorandum plainly states, quote, "The federal government should perform its functions efficiently and effectively while ensuring that its actions result in the best value for taxpayers," unquote. While I have much respect for the hard work that has been done by the GSA to date, I have serious reservations about the efficiency and effectiveness of having 2 overlapping networks contract vehicles. I submit that best value is achieved by maximizing competition. Simply put, the network's enterprise contract offers lower prices and more competition than the universal contract. Accordingly, and for the reasons further stated, Sprint recommends that the government either combine the network's contract vehicles into one contract or at least direct agencies to Networks Enterprise. The two network contracts, Universal and Enterprise, overlap considerably, creating unnecessary complexities resulting in delays and lost savings. Some examples are, first, the complexity of the networks contract has created millions of unique price points resulting in confusion and delays. Second, duplicative services offered on both contracts are priced differently, also causing confusion and delays. And third, terminology changes between the old contract and the new grind the gears of transition to a halt. It is in the government's best interest to open competition to all 5 networks contractors to achieve best value, save money, and complete the transition by the mid-2011 deadline. It is well accepted that greater competition leads to better value for consumers, industry, and government. All 5 government contractors represented today hold Networks Enterprise contracts. However, there are only 3 Networks Universal vendors. As such, solicitations issued under Networks Universal, by definition, are subject to less competition. Collapsing the contracts, or at least directing agencies to the lower-cost Networks Enterprise, will facilitate a faster transition. Additionally, over 95% of the current FTS 2001 inventory of services installed at agencies is available on Enterprise. All parties would benefit if GSA combines the networks contracts or directs agencies to the lower-priced Networks Enterprise vehicle. By collapsing the contracts, agencies would have a clearer and faster path to traditional services and transformative capabilities like unified communications, mobile integration, and 4G. GSA would have a more streamlined administrative effort, lower cost to manage contract modifications, reporting, and the contract oversight process. The universal vendors would also have reduced labor and administrative efforts required to support the duplicative contracts. These resources can be reinvested in expediting transition. Finally, I think it's important to emphasize that the longer it takes to merge or direct traffic to one contract, the more difficult it could be to transition services at the end of networks. Sprint also has invested millions of dollars in networks and is better prepared for the transition based on lessons learned from our prior FTS 2001 transition experience. To highlight some of the progress to date, Sprint has moved over 423,000 voice lines from FTS to networks in an average of 1.5 days per project, and over 400 internet protocol services in an average of 21 days per project. No contractor is better prepared or more experienced than Sprint for this transition task. Simplifying the contract platform would go a long way to reducing transition complexity and ultimately accelerate transition. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. White, for your testimony. Ms. Gowan.
Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Isa, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Diana Gowan. I'm the Senior VP and General Manager of Quest Government Services. We are an awardee of both Networks Universal and Enterprise. I'll begin by addressing some of the root causes of the network transition delays. Networks was designed to be more innovative, cost-effective, and transformative than prior contracts. Industry and the agencies welcomed this change. Unfortunately, the new contracts were so vastly different from the 2 predecessor contracts that agencies had to learn new, complex pricing and service structures. With the loss of key contracting and technology staff, heightened focus on OMB compliance issues, and a 42-month extension of FTS 2001, networks transition fell to the bottom of the pile. Incumbentitis and comfort with the status quo set in. Agencies heaved a huge sigh of relief, let their inventories grow stale, and had no incentive to plan or to move forward. All of these issues could have been overcome if OMB and GSA had helped agencies simplify the procurement process. They did not, And unfortunately, we are here after more than 3 years with, by my calculation, almost $1 billion in lost savings. And continued lost savings accruing as, I heard this morning, $22.5 million per month. A lot of technical and contracting help could have been provided for the cost of doing nothing during that time. Exacerbating all of these issues were two unfortunate choices GSA made. In 2006, before Networks was awarded, was the decision to extend the FTS 2001 contracts for 42 months. The legacy contracts marched full speed ahead with no fixed date for stopping new orders. Unbelievably, FTS 2001 continues to have more new orders than Networks. Secondly, GSA measured transition progress by a flawed metric, counting things disconnected rather than dollars moved from the old contract to the new. This creates an illusion of progress. Under Networks, the procurement process has been too complex with too few knowledgeable procurement and technical resources. Agencies have not made fair opportunity decisions quickly, so we should focus on steps that would create momentum, increase agency industry dialogue, compare pricing, or issue requests only for pricing, and if proposals are necessary at this stage, make them oral. Transition like for like, transform later. For those agencies that have proposals in hand, the evaluation criteria should be rigorously followed and decisions made. For transition, agencies should build a project timeline and stick to it. Hold folks accountable. I am encouraged by GSA Administrator Martha Johnson's focus on transparency, innovation, operational excellence, and customer intimacy. In the long run, this vision will push GSA to make better customer support decisions. In the short term, we need GSA's continued collaboration with all of the stakeholders. Quest has made every effort to assist in the transition, investing tens of millions of dollars in tools, in people, meaning jobs, for proposals, for contracting, for program management, for training staff, and educating agencies. Despite these efforts, the delays continue. The cost of Networks bids and the delays in transition are leading to a death spiral of costs chasing declining revenues and profitability. There is real economic harm. These problems have been largely ignored by several oversight agencies since the award of Networks. OMB, the GAO, the CIO Council, GSA should not feel good about where we are today. Oversight, such as that provided by your hearing today, is vital. We recommend Congress and OMB encourage GSA to extend the Networks contracts 5 years until 2022 and to freeze the rate structure at today's rates until at least 80% of the dollars on FTS 2001 have been moved to the Networks contract. It's time to make some basic changes to the program to ensure the government gets the best deal, industry is treated fairly, and agencies get the chance to transform to modern technology at world-class pricing. Thank you for the opportunity to present our views on this important program, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Morch.
Good morning, Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee. As a Networks carrier, Level 3 Communications would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify about the delays in implementation of the Networks contract. My name is Edward Morche, and I am the Senior Vice President of Level 3's Federal Markets Group. Broadly speaking, there are 5 major work elements involved within the transition process. Agencies must, 1, obtain the current inventory of their services, 2, choose between the Networks Enterprise or Universal
You want to pull the mic,
contract.
just pull the mic just a little closer to you. You want to pull that mic just a little closer to you. Having trouble hearing you.
Is that better?
Yeah, go ahead.
3, convert their legacy inventory to Networks-based CLINs. 4, conduct fair opportunity, and 5, evaluate the carrier responses. Each one of these steps affects an agency's resources and has the potential to introduce delays to the process. It is the opinion of Level 3 Communications that these principles could be minimized through a combination of the following principles. A, reduce agency workload where possible by outsourcing actions to the carriers. B, parse out the services to be transitioned into narrower scopes. And C, eliminate as many decision points as possible. For many agencies, obtaining an inventory of current services is a time-consuming and difficult task. It is further exacerbated by the fact that services are continually evolving as the needs of agencies change. As a result, it is very challenging to assemble an inventory that is 100% complete and accurate. Rather than seeking to establish a comprehensive inventory prior to transitioning services, agencies could focus on gathering information that is easily available and then use that subset of information to perform fair opportunity. This incremental approach to transition will also build necessary skills at every step in the process through repetition and experience. For the first time ever, agencies are now required to choose between 2 contract vehicles, either Networks Enterprise or Networks Universal. In an effort to eliminate as many decision points as possible, agencies could be instructed to use both contracts simultaneously, or alternatively, they could be instructed to use the more competitive Networks Enterprise contract as the default contract vehicle. For all intents and purposes, there are no differences between the 2 contracts, except that Networks Enterprise has more vendors and, for most services, lower prices. In fact, the Networks Enterprise contract supports 96% of the total number of services offered, while Networks Universal has only 92% of the services. Furthermore, an analysis of pricing on the public Networks Unit Pricer shows that agencies can realize substantial savings on the most popular services by using the more competitive Networks Enterprise contract, and I have included specific examples in my written testimony. Making Networks Enterprise the default contract could save the government an incremental $1 billion over the 10-year life of the contract. Despite these facts, the vast majority of fair opportunity awards have been made under the Networks Universal contract. Converting legacy information to the Networks CLIN structure could easily be outsourced to the carriers. All 5 of the Networks carriers have personnel with expertise in taking basic network configuration information and putting that into the framework that is required to provide a quote under Networks. In regards to the fair opportunity process, agencies could eliminate the decision on whether or not to use the unit pricer by issuing requests for proposal to all 5 of the Networks carriers and let the carriers do the work of putting together the best price solutions to meet the government's needs. Delays in the evaluation phase of transition can be reduced by making the award process simpler and establishing lowest price as the single and only decision criterion. All 5 Networks carriers have been vetted by GSA and offer the same set of well-defined services with common service level agreements. As a result, agencies could use a single decision criterion to make their selection. In closing, Level 3 Communications believes that each step in the transition process could be accelerated in the following ways. 1, parsing out the legacy service inventories into smaller pieces. 2, making Networks Enterprise the default contract or issuing all requirements on both contracts simultaneously. 3, using the expertise that exists within the carriers to translate legacy service information into Networks CLINs. 4, issuing all requirements as requests for proposal. And 5, establishing lowest price as the sole decision criterion for transition. Level 3 Communications would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and we look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morshey, for your testimony. Mr. Herring.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee for the opportunity to share AT&T's observations about Networks transition. I'm Don Herring, and as the leader of AT&T's federal government business, I'm actually energized by the potential of networks to transform the way the government operates and interacts with its citizens. AT&T, as you may know, is a premier supplier of global network and information services. We bring a highly reliable, resilient, and secure network infrastructure to support the advanced needs of our worldwide customer base. The AT&T business unit that I'm fortunate enough to lead, AT&T Government Solutions, relies on talented staff members who focus on the IT needs of the federal government. This team of AT&T professionals is committed to the success of networks. Transitions the size and scope of networks are demanding, but we have a vast base of both commercial and government experience to accomplish these efforts in a timely fashion. AT&T is already transforming several agencies' networks to secure and cost-effective technologies. At one agency, for example, we're deploying a virtual private network to over 250 remote locations, and together we're exploring the addition of wireless sensors and satellite-enhanced mobility services. At another agency, we were selected to transform its entire communications network of over 1,000 agency sites to deliver technologies ranging from traditional voice to secure data networks to mobility services. And at another agency, we're providing cloud-based information distribution services to improve their constituent communications. The scope and scale of networks allows us to deliver the full range of AT&T's innovative technology and services to the federal government. Networks transitions have an extraordinary number of moving parts that require rigorous coordination. This is true regardless of the network's size or scope, and it's not a small task for agency procurement and CIO teams. In many cases, the challenges faced by the transition teams have been compounded by external factors that demand attention and divert agencies' resources away from networks. Cybersecurity, improved transparency, and social media policies to support a more connected and mobile employee base are extremely important as they enable us to deliver today's and tomorrow's technology to the government. However, these efforts do impact the time, resources, and expertise that can be directed to the network's effort. Agency staffing complications also impact networks transition. Because transition efforts of this magnitude are a once-in-a-decade occurrence, many agencies lack the staffing resources necessary to manage the technical and logistical detail associated with an agency-wide transition. There are, however, steps that can be taken to quicken the pace of networks transition, to reduce risks associated with the anticipated surge in orders as the deadline approaches. Agencies, GSA, and network service providers should coordinate to develop and adhere to specific, disclosed, and harmonized timetables for releases of requests for proposals and subsequent awards. Second, supplementary resources should be provided to agency teams that are struggling to make and implement informed choices as they move to networks. To that end, the government should consider dedicating resources to support transition, whose responsibilities include: 1, establishing a centralized pool of experts to deploy within agencies to manage and complete transition; 2, working directly with individual agencies to craft detailed transition strategies with contingent milestones; and 3, creating a repository of agency strategies and schedules to share with other agencies and industry. And finally, we recommend the government consider providing incentives to agencies to create comprehensive transition plans and adhere to them. Specifically, we suggest the government review the timing and the structure of the Transition Reimbursement Credit Program to support thoughtful agency transition planning and execution. This recommendation should in no way be interpreted as an effort to slow transition, but rather to reflect our strong belief that an improved planning process should ultimately speed transition. In summary, there's a great deal to be gained from networks: significant financial efficiencies, enhanced technology services, government operations transformation, and AT&T is committed to the success of networks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Herring, for your testimony. Let me just, before we move from there, when you mention supplemental and incentives, what do you actually mean by that?
So today, agencies are eligible for a transition reimbursement credit from GSA if they submit all of their orders. In fact, there's a deadline now by August 31st of this year. That's an important step in a milestone. However, it's not the only step. We believe at AT&T that the way you achieve ultimate goals and implement large projects is to break it down into smaller projects, milestones that are held closely, that folks are accountable for, and that you would then incent agencies to meet those many milestones along the way. So giving orders to the network's carriers is a very important step. It's not the only step. And I would suggest the government looks at that so that we can chunk this, if you will, into smaller bites, but still get towards the ultimate transition goal of having everything transitioned by June of next year.
Right. Let me ask, I asked this of the first panel, but let me ask you too. What is the single greatest thing that we can do today, right now, to speed up this transition? And I just want to go right down the line. Why don't I start with you, Mrs. Zelenak?
Thank you. I think it's pretty much come across. Agencies need to dedicate the resources to getting the job done. So I think that the single biggest thing would be to call on those agencies who have to go through transition and have them identify who will be leading their transition and what's the team that they're going to put in place to make it happen.
Mr. White.
What I would suggest is that for the agencies that have not made their decisions, to put together their statements of work, get that process going, because that's the front end of the process. Until they make their evaluation on who they want to do business with going forward, nothing else occurs. So I would encourage the agencies to get their paper out to the 5 carriers and allow us to move forward.
Ms. Gowan.
Well, I think I said this in my testimony. I'll repeat it. I believe that first the agencies do need to make their decision on who their vendor is. They can do that by opening a dialogue, by looking at pricing tables, by having pricing bids. If they feel they really have to have a statement of work, have oral responses, that will quicken the process, and then make a decision. There are many agencies who have responses from us in-house. They've had them in-house for months and months. So if they would rigorously follow their evaluation criteria and make a decision, that's a great step forward. Last, those who have made decisions, if they will put a project plan together, put the resources against it, and stick to it, then we could all be successful.
All right. Mr. Morche.
Thank you. Ideally, the agencies outsource as much of the work as possible to the carriers. We've heard quite a bit today about how the agencies are under-resourced with the right kinds of individuals. High-level activities such as converting the existing CLIN structure from their inventories to the new networks CLIN structure.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could I ask the witness please to pull the microphone closer? We cannot hear you.
Sorry, is that better? Having the carriers do the conversion work from the FTS 2001 contract structure to networks is something we're all capable of doing. Encouraging the agencies to not try to complete a 100% inventory of the current services, but to complete inventories based on regions, based on sub-agencies, based on types of service, and move those out in smaller, more manageable statements of work. Also, to eliminate the confusion about which contract to use. We believe firmly that more competition is better, that lower pricing is better, and that's recognized by Networks Enterprise.
Thank you. Mr. Herring.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We believe going forward the biggest single thing that can happen is ensuring predictability. That is, when does an agency plan to transition their service from FTS 2001 to networks? And to get predictability, you have to ensure that a full and complete plan is done. Milestones, that is across agency, GSA, and the folks at this table as well. Predictability will allow all of us to identify where the problems are. A milestone plan will allow us to identify where the future problems will be, and I think that will ensure speedy transition, more speedy transition onto networks.
Right. Thank you very much. I now yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Congressman Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all for being here. I find myself in an odd situation. I recognize that I have the 5 premier suppliers of telecom services in the country, but I have a contract that doesn't seem to match. Let me just try to go through a couple of questions we had the GSA here a moment ago. I said nothing ill of them, but perhaps you will. For Sprint and Level 3, is there any reason that you couldn't provide, if you were allowed to, under the, quote, universal contract, the same services the universal contract has? more or less a yes or no. Can you provide could you in fact bid and meet under the universal contract all of its requirements?
We could.
Mr. White?
We bid universal, and we lost that contract some years ago. Currently, we hold the Networks Enterprise contract, and we can provide all the capabilities that are listed on the enterprise contract, which meets the large majority of the requirements of the agencies.
So, if I understand correctly, if the GSA simply said, you can quote, say I want a universal contract, but I want the enterprise prices and terms that you two offer on your enterprise contract, you could do that. You could meet the same prices, because I noticed that the other three vendors, they offer the same price on both contracts. Would you do the same, I guess, is the real short question.
Sprint would. I think part of the confusion for the agencies today is that there is duplicity of services. There's also examples where prices for services are not the same, and that has created the structure where there are literally millions of pricing items, which causes a lot of confusion and delays.
And of course, I'm, like most members of Congress, given cliff notes of specific examples. So the examples I have in front of me are dedicated, non-dedicated high-speed broadband lines going from 10 MIP through T, and T. After T3, I never bought anything faster than that, so the rest of them are just kind of interesting to me. But, Mr. Moshi, on behalf of L3, you are, in the case of both, in my notes at least, both dedicated and non-dedicated, let's say T1 lines or 1 MIP lines, you're dramatically lower on the network enterprise than your competition. I mean, you simply are the least expensive. Are those prices good if you were on universal?
Absolutely. There's no reason for us to have higher pricing.
Okay.
If you look
so one of the questions for this committee to send back to GSA in our follow-up would be, why wouldn't you be allowed to comply with those contracts based on the bid? In other words, say if somebody wants universal, it's all 5 of you, just as if somebody wants enterprise, it's all 5 of you. From the 2 of you, that's okay, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I've got 3 others here at the table. Is there any reason that the customer that you're now sitting in front of, we're a consumer too, wouldn't be better off? I'm not sure if your companies would be better, but better off if GSA simply said, you can choose to have this, quote, universal, but you can still get these other 2 and their existing prices, no rebid. Is there any reason that from my standpoint, that isn't fair for me to try to do? Ms. Gowan?
There was initially a fundamental difference between Networks Universal and Enterprise. And Networks Universal was supposed to be the continuity of operations contract, had every single thing the predecessor contract had in it.
Mm-hmm.
Enterprise did not. And I don't believe that's changed. So once you got initial transition done, then you could open up the whole idea of merging the contracts.
Okay.
But you'd have to get to the point where you'd had the continuity accommodated.
Okay, well, then let me go through this. I guess a couple of you have bridge, let's see, Verizon and Sprint?
Yes, that's correct.
So people are negotiating bridge contracts right now.
Well, not right now. We're on the bridge contract
You're
right
on
now.
the bridge contract.
We're moving to continuity of service.
But they're paying a higher price for it.
They are paying a higher price
Why?
for some services than networks.
Why? Why should I pay a higher price for the same service if you've said you can deliver them with a profit at the lower price?
Sure. When we were competing for networks and we built a lot of our back office systems and processes, we put a lot of automation into the process, created tools that are specific for networks that don't work for FTS 2001. So part of the way of reducing prices was to introduce automation into the process, and so that's one of the reasons clearly why the rates are different. And in terms of the 2 different contracts, under Networks Universal, we had to comply with requirements for 39 mandatory services. On Enterprise, I think it was something like 13. So there is a difference in what you were required to do in Universal. The other thing is the prices can change on the contracts all the time. So prices, I think, since the contracts have been awarded, have been lowered repeatedly on both contracts. So if an agency really wants to look at all 5, they already have enterprise to do it.
Well, I guess I go back to the same question, and my time is expiring, but why is it universal really is necessary today? I understand this idea that you bridge once and then you're able to bridge better, but now we're talking about taking till 2011. The contract is half over by the time somebody takes the baby step in some cases. Am I missing something, or is that correct?
If I may, sir,
Yes, sir.
Give you our opinion on this as well. I don't believe that the cause of the delay thus far for networks is caused by having 2 contracts. I don't think it's a major decision for an agency to decide between A or B, in this case, Universal or Enterprise. And instead, we should really focus the agencies on making that initial decision, not a difficult one on which one to choose. It's in plain black and white on what people can buy in services, what the prices are, and then instead concentrate on what are the milestones to get you transitioned to whatever agency and whatever carrier you choose. And I think spending time, frankly, on going between, trying to address whether we should have 1 or 2 contracts, which is now a 7-year-old issue, takes time away and energy and distraction from really the task at hand for all of us, which is to transition to networks.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask all of you to give me one answer for the record. Be as lengthy and complete as you can. From our standpoint, from sitting up here, networks is less expensive, and it is where we are going to. Please answer for the record as completely as possible why this committee should not look toward moving all of government to a less expensive, more competitive solution through interim legislation. In other words, we're looking and saying, you guys are getting these rollouts fairly slow. We do not have to wait. We do not have to maintain networks to its original date, to its ending date. We can, in fact, look at new legislation for new opportunities that pushes people agencies toward better, cheaper, faster. So please give me your answers from each of your company's perspectives why this committee should not begin the process of moving us toward a unified networks solution type rebid that would envision that if it's going to take till 2011 to get everybody, quote, up to this baby step, that we shouldn't look at 2011 as an implementation of the next step. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, and let me remind the gentleman that this hearing has to be over at 11.
I'm done.
Okay, right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I only wanted those answers for the record.
That's what I thought. That's why I wasn't answering.
It would take way too long to do it any other way. Thank you.
That's what I thought. He wanted. Okay.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gowan, in your written testimony, you talk about the problems with the slow transition of networks, and you said it could have been overcome if GSA had simplified the procurement process and helped individual agencies. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. Is the procurement process the villain of the piece here, or is it a big part of the problem?
There are many villains here. My statement there was simply GSA is doing that now. They are helping agencies and bringing resources to bear to help them get their decisions made, their transitions made. Early on in the process, that did not happen. And as far as procurement simplified, once again, in our mind, it was a matter of resources, technical and contracting, and if OMB and GSA had helped agencies figure out, if I save money here, I can afford to hire some contractors to help me get there and to develop that business case and move forward. And early on, that did not happen.
But I take it from your testimony that nonetheless, there are some streamlining ideas you have about the procurement process in general, keying in on this experience that you might have us consider.
For future issues, well, That's fascinating.
I guess what I'm getting at is clearly this has been a problematic situation. What are the lessons learned moving forward? We need to fix this, but there are lessons to be learned moving forward, and I was intrigued by your comment on the procurement process being at least one big piece of that.
Well, that is this whole fair opportunity process, and it's been very complex for agencies. I think many of us sat here and said initially if agencies had done a like-for-like transition and made decisions on like-for-like, we would have been much further along. Instead, and many of us encouraged this because we have a contract that allows for it, we encouraged agencies to look at transformation and adopting new technologies. But that is a complex process. And most of them initially stopped their dialogue with industry and said, you know, I have a procurement process going on, I can't talk to you. I think if agencies had kept a dialogue up with industry, we could have helped them simplify what these statements of work could have looked like. We could have helped quicken the process. So I think that is a big lesson that we all could learn, is somehow or another to get the contracting shops throughout the government to understand that having dialogue with industry is not a bad thing. It's a helpful thing and should happen up front.
Yeah, I certainly concur. Mr. Herring, did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Connolly, and appreciate your comments earlier today. I agree with the comments that more open dialogue within the parameters of the federal acquisition regulations, of course, would be helpful. And at oftentimes, this goes back to my point of making sure there are milestones and a project plan, if you will, and that includes in the procurement process. When will an RFP, request for proposal, be issued? When do you expect to make an award? And that just parlays into the transition effort as well. But if I could expand my answer as well onto a slightly different topic, but an issue that seems to be a common theme here, which is let's go ahead and do like-for-like transition. I do believe that will speed the transition up. However, I think we should not be short-sighted in what this contract called networks can do. We talk about price, very important component. We talk about speed, very important, getting to the June date of next year as well. But I think something that should have equal importance as well is making sure government agencies can take advantage of the advanced technologies that are on the networks contract. To go like for like is essentially saying buy the same service you bought 10 years ago. We all know how much technology has advanced in the past 10 years and is advancing each and every day and each and every month. So looking at ways to both speed the transition, lower costs for governments and therefore helping our citizens, but also keeping in mind technology advancement, which is what this contract is designed to do. In fact, it's very flexible on what new technologies you can add to it. I think we should make sure we look at the entire picture. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see my time is up, and if I had more time, I would go on from the procurement process to ask you about the personnel challenge, because you heard the testimony in the previous panel. I mean, to me it is stunning that somebody...
I will yield the gentleman an additional 2 minutes before he takes it.
I thank the chairman. I thank the chairman. All right, let me ask, because you heard the testimony about agencies even needed help on statement of work from GSA, and simply did not have the capability in-house, even in some large agencies, frankly, to move forward. And if somebody passed on or transitioned out, the capability went with them. From your point of view as carriers, how much of an impediment is that, too, in moving forward successfully?
I'll start, and thank you. I do believe it's an impediment at the moment. I believe there are resource drains, not necessarily in quantity, although that is an issue inside of agencies, but sometimes in the skill set as well. And it supports the point that I've made just previously, which is if we are short-sighted enough to only look at the speed and go like for like, we'll be more reliant upon people who have had those skill sets for the last 10 years and maybe even beyond, and not allow new technology, automation, to help with some of that, where people can change their skills then and focus on the agency's mission. Thank you.
I think the fact that we're here 3 years later talking about transition is somewhat appalling. We started this whole conversation years ago about how can we transform government to be on par with private industry. You know, I would compare our commercial side of our business to the government side of our business and say there's a 3 to 5 year gap in technology. Looking at the lack of resources inside the agencies, the ability to re-engineer and re-architect what is there has put a great deal of pressure on the agencies, where we've now fallen back to a point where we'll accept a transition of like for like. And at this point, getting the transition done is a step towards transformation. I think we've come to a realization that transformation in one fell swoop is just overwhelming at this point for the agencies. That being said, transitioning like for like, we should still take advantage of every opportunity we have for government to have access to the lowest prices and greatest networks that our country avails.
I have to hearken back to the dialogue with industry. I think industry can help the agencies work through this process. I think probably every one of my peers feels that way as well. You have to do it before you're into a very formal procurement process, but I think if they do that well ahead, we can all sit down and help them with transformation. And I agree with that. We are all saying like for like now, because we are so late in this process. If we were 3 years ago and we could have agencies in full dialogue with all of us, you know, I think it would be a different world, but we can't. We got to move forward from today.
Obviously, human capital is a growing issue, and as technology changes, it's going to become even more exacerbated. I think one of the things that we should be focused on is how can we simplify the administrative side of the equation so that the people that are in the jobs today can do a more effective and efficient job by simplifying the contract environment so they don't have to wade through millions of different contract line items in order to figure out which direction they should go in. So from my perspective, it's all very simple. And the more focus and the easier we can make it for the agencies by collapsing the contracts, the faster the whole process will move forward. Thank you.
And from our perspective, we do see that the lack of acquisition officers is a big issue, and there just aren't as many as there used to be. And on the other side of the aisle, the federal contracting process has become more complex. So when you put those two together, you definitely are going to run into some roadblocks. So simplifying the actual statements of work, breaking up the procurements into smaller pieces might be a good way to go for government.
Thank you very much. I now yield to the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. I think you are addressing several of the concerns that I have, but I want to state them, and you can then write to the committee as a whole your responses, because I think I'm hearing the answers, but let me just place it out there. As you know, we have a joint session, and we need to get down there. There worries that as the final year of the transition approaches, there will be a surge in orders by agencies straining to meet the deadline. And this surge could put a significant strain on vendor resources and ultimately jeopardize the success of the transition. Now, here are the questions. What are all of you doing to ensure that you will not be overwhelmed during the final months of the transition if there is a surge in orders? And I think I've heard some of the responses, but this will help you frame your response to the committee. What should the agencies, GSA and OMB, be doing to coordinate the timing of orders and to reduce the risk of this occurring? And what do you think are the key checkpoint agencies should have in any plan, and how would their implementation be measured? And don't you think it's a little late in the process for agencies to just now be forming a detailed transition strategy? So all of you have been referencing those questions. I'd like to have them in writing, Mr. Chair, and rather than take the time for them to respond as they have been doing.
Without
if they could get the
So
gist
ordered.
of what we're asking, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so very much, all the witnesses, for being here.
Yeah, let me just ask one quick question before we conclude. Can you provide a real world example of how the transition delay has affected your business? And just right down the line. Start with you, Mr.
I'm happy to go first.
Sure.
Yeah, we've talked about this amongst each other and publicly. The challenge that a publicly traded company has is we have to manage our operating budget, which is headcount. We manage that based on, as Don said, milestones and expectations of when business demand is going to come our way. When we expect a tsunami of orders and they don't come, and then we expect another tsunami of orders and they don't come, and we expect another tsunami of orders and they don't come, it's very, very difficult for us to ensure that we have the right people in place at the company at the right time and to be prepared for the day when they do finally come. It's extremely taxing in terms of our budgets and our planning, and on top of that is the capital budget for where we need to augment all of our networks relative to new technology.
I would add that, this is all about a business case. So there is the promise of lower prices on networks. We're delivering that to agencies that have transitioned today. But the promise of lower prices was built on some basic assumptions in the business case. So that really is the risk as it exists today, that we are not seeing the return that we had projected. We've invested at Sprint millions of dollars in building online portals to be easier to do business with, to support new technology and services. So, that is the feedback I would provide, Chairman.
And I would echo both of my colleagues on both sides. We have, as I said, hired people ready to get orders and respond to statements of work. We've had 3 different occasions when we expected tsunamis of statements of work, hired up, ready to go, and had a little swell, and that was it, and agencies relaxed again. And I expect exactly the same thing with orders. So it is building up cadre and then stopping. And the other piece is exactly what Bill said. We have invested millions and millions, tens, hundreds of millions in systems that have not been used to date, and there is little return.
Yeah, I would totally echo my colleagues as well, and just add that what is expected to be done between now and June of 2011 just might be impossible. And I think it needs to be recognized that no matter what actions are taken, the volume of activity yet to be done is staggering. And I think we have all agreed among ourselves that our ability to actually accomplish all that by June of 2011, given the current status, is going to be quite difficult. And so that's one of the challenges for our business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have the same financial pressures as everyone else at the table. We invested millions of dollars as well up front, and that's a real concern. Maybe a bit of a softer concern, but one that is real to us and real to the way we think about how we're trying to help the federal government and its citizens is thus far, because many decisions have not been made to transition to networks, we haven't been able to offer the best that AT&T can offer to agencies so far. We are trying to help agencies transform the way they achieve their mission, the way they help citizens, not just transition from one contract to another. So I worry that this time pressure that we're now under doesn't allow all of us, including AT&T, to put our best foot forward to help serve the citizens.
I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Often one round leads to an even better set of questions in the second round, and these will probably be ones that, again, I'm going to ask you to primarily submit for the record. Before I came to Congress, I ran a electronics company, and I stay in touch. I'm still on the board of the company, so I get to see their price downs, who's supplying services, and so on. And I also get to see the very short period of contracts with no protest that we have. We bring all of you in, we bid it, we make our decision based on a package of price and services and delivery. And and we make our decision, and that's the end of it. And you know, the purchasing agent has to tell 4 out of the 5, we're really sorry, but you know, next time. It appears as though part of the reform that this committee should be looking at with GSA is what I talked about earlier in the statement, which is that, you know, when I go to a buffet, I can make a very quick decision. I may not take the vegetables they plan, but I can make a quick decision. This contract, or series of contracts, has enjoyed protest after GSA has done the primary bidding in the process. It has enjoyed a tendency for you to, if you will, all of you, to be part of the slowdown, not just part of the frustration that it's going slow. So I'm going to ask each of you, if we go back to GSA and we say we want to have this whole process changed, would each of you support a process in which the selection by the agencies would be very much more like a buffet? They would be able to make the decision among you as vendors with a price structure in place, and effectively not have to go through the level of bidding that they're going through. Because all day today we've been hearing that in a sense we don't have the capability to know what we want, we don't have the ability to write it, and then of course after we make a decision, one of you that doesn't get it protests the process that somehow the work wasn't properly defined. If anyone disagrees, please speak up now, and we'll save time if there's minimum disagreement. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I disagree that that going back to you know, not allowing protests to happen.
Well, I'm not saying not allowing protests. I'm saying that GSA would streamline the process so that more of the decisions would be made in the GSA process, so that an agency could choose. For example, assuming that an agency said, we believe we fit GSA table number 2, for example, and as to this particular potpourri of services, and we fit this as to voice services, and of course they have their own internal transition cost because you're not supplying all the hardware. If in fact GSA pre-screened this to where, as long as, if you will, a safe haven in the bidding process, as long as an agency said, yeah, we reasonably believe we fit under GSA X, we then can make that decision without a protest. It's just the same as somebody walks up and says, yeah, I think this will work for me, period. It appears as though, and all of you have been involved in the protest capability is generated by an absence of certainty by an agency that if they choose something that was pre-selected, they have a safe haven to just implement. Now, is that, you still disagree with that?
I do agree that streamlining would be very helpful, and frankly, oversight from GSA, I think, is also what we're talking about here, would be helpful. We do not support, though, getting rid of the protest capability in general. And if I could expand for 1 second, I'd recognize the time.
We're assuming that you would protest at the GSA if they felt that their schedule or block things agencies could pick from were inappropriate. But go ahead.
Yeah, that capability we would welcome. We have AT&T has protested 4 awards thus far. In 3 of the cases, the government has decided to take remedy and has agreed with our position to go change, either rebid the process, et cetera. And I think it falls back to what we talked about before, which is the skill set and the personnel inside of an agency is sometimes lacking in understanding the procurement process in general, understanding the details of it. So oversight and help from GSA would be recommended.
Ms. Goen, you appear to have your finger at the ready. Because we're frustrated because we'd like to see agencies making accurate decisions, but we'd also like to see as much of it predetermined so that those decisions would be within the capability of the agency. But go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, your whole analogy of the buffet, you know, I think the contract is a buffet. And one of the issues from my perspective is that agencies have unduly complicated choosing from the buffet. And as vis-a-vis protest, the big problem is when you do a complex RFP, statement of work, and you set out an evaluation criteria, and then you don't follow it, you get into trouble. And I don't care whether it's networks or full and open somewhere else.
We'll just
Agencies have
use
to do
a
that.
refueling tanker as a hypothetical example.
Right.
Thank you, and I guess quickly, so the chairman. If I could make one point, so just for the record, level 3 has never made a protest, so I think we're the only one of the 5. I would highlight that I think one of the problems we all see is the statements of work that are coming out are so large. If somebody was to lose it and they feel that it was for the wrong reason, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity goes by the wayside. It puts an enormous amount of pressure on carriers to want to protest that. If the statements of work RFPs were much smaller, more reasonable for us to digest, I think the pressure on a carrier to want to protest a loss of that size is diminished significantly. As long as all 5 of us have access to the same thing, I think everybody benefits.
And I think I see heads both in first row and second row shaking. Finally, you get the closing word.
Thank you. I think that one of the things the agencies are doing is putting together very complex statements of work to make sure they don't have to do another fair opportunity later. Really, I think that they're trying to get everything into one to say, okay, now I can buy this and all the follow-on services I'll ever need. And so I think, once again, if we simplified, let's buy this much now and do another fair opportunity once you get past transition, we might be able to get this thing moving a little faster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me thank all of you for your testimony and to say to you that we really appreciate it. Our concern on this side is that if there's an opportunity to save money and to cut down on costs, that's our interest, that's our concern. And, of course, we would like to see it move as quickly as possible. And, of course, this is why we have these hearings, to sort of see in terms of what we might be able to do and also to get information coming from you as to how we might be able to facilitate it. I want to thank all of you for your hearing, for your testimony, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.